Katie Brooks walked through the massive doors of Galactic Youth Academy with a bright smile on her face, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders as she took in the incredible sight before her. The hall stretched higher than any building she had seen back home on Earth, with walls that shimmered like mother of pearl and floors so polished she could see her reflection dancing beneath her feet. She was the first human student to ever attend this prestigious school, a fact that made her both excited and cautious as she navigated the crowded corridors filled with beings that looked nothing like her. There were students with scales that changed colors, others with multiple arms or eyes that glowed softly in the dim light, and some that seemed to float rather than walk. The 14-year-old girl appeared completely ordinary by human standards, brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, bright green eyes that sparkled with curiosity, and a cheerful expression that never seemed to fade. But something in the way she moved through the crowd suggested a deeper awareness, as if she was constantly measuring distances and cataloging details. Without even thinking about it, her homeroom was located on the 3rd level, a spacious chamber with curved walls and seating designed to accommodate various body types and sizes. Professor Velm, a tall Torgathy with gray skin and 4 slender arms, stood at the front of the room arranging datapads with nervous precision. "Ah, you must be our new student from Earth," the professor said, his voice carrying a slight tremor that Katie immediately noticed. He was afraid of her, or at least wary, though she couldn't understand why yet. "Yes, sir. I'm Katie Brooks," she replied with genuine warmth, extending her hand in the traditional human greeting before remembering that most species here didn't share that custom. She pulled it back smoothly, her smile never wavering. Professor Velm gestured toward an empty seat near the middle of the room, and Katie made her way there while feeling the weight of dozens of alien eyes following her every movement. She could hear whispers in languages she didn't recognize, though the translation implant in her ear provided scattered fragments like "primitive world" and "how did she even qualify?" The seat next to hers was occupied by a Korthan girl named Zira, whose crystalline features reflected light in mesmerizing patterns. She had the bearing of someone from an important family, with perfect posture and carefully controlled movements that spoke of formal training. "I'm Zira," the alien girl said softly, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Welcome to Harmony 7. Though I must admit I'm surprised the Academy accepted a student from such a..." She paused, searching for diplomatic words. "Developing civilization." Katie's smile brightened rather than dimmed, and she replied with genuine friendliness. "Earth might be new to galactic society, but we're eager to learn. I grew up in the mountains back home, so living on a space station will be quite different." She didn't elaborate on what growing up in the mountains actually meant. Didn't mention the years spent learning to track dangerous animals through dense forests or the countless nights camping in territories where apex predators roamed freely. Those details seemed unnecessary for a casual introduction. Across the room, a large student named Drex, who belonged to the Kron species, let out a loud laugh that rumbled like distant thunder. "A human? I heard about your kind. You're from one of those dirty little planets where everything is trying to kill you, right? How does someone so small and weak even survive there?" The room fell silent as other students waited to see how Katie would respond to such open mockery. They expected tears perhaps, or anger, or the fear that most civilized species showed when confronted with aggression. Instead, Katie turned toward Drex with that same cheerful smile, her green eyes meeting his without any hint of intimidation. "Oh, Earth can be challenging," she said lightly, as if discussing the weather rather than responding to an insult. "But you learn to adapt. My family has lived in the wilderness for generations, so I guess we're used to it." Drex seemed confused by her lack of reaction, his broad face scrunching up as he tried to understand why his intimidation hadn't worked. He was accustomed to other students backing down immediately. But this tiny human just kept smiling at him with an expression that was somehow both friendly and completely unreadable. Professor Velm cleared his throat nervously and began the lesson, discussing the principles of interspecies cooperation that formed the foundation of galactic society. Kitty listened attentively, while her eyes occasionally tracked movements around the room with a precision that would have seemed strange if anyone had been watching closely enough during a break between lessons. A Mindari student named Plex approached her desk with visible curiosity. His species was known for their analytical minds and insatiable thirst for knowledge, and the idea of a human student clearly fascinated him. "I've been reading about Earth," Plex said, his large eyes blinking rapidly with excitement. "The Galactic Registry classifies it as a Category 9 Deathworld. That's extraordinarily rare for planets that produce sentient life. How do you cope with such extreme conditions?" Katie shrugged casually, reaching into her backpack for a water container. "I don't really think about it much. It's just home, you know? Though I guess the gravity here feels pretty light compared to what I'm used to. And the air seems really clean." She didn't mention that the station's carefully controlled environment felt almost sterile to her, or that her muscles were constantly recalibrating to the lighter gravity that made everything feel slightly off balance. These were observations she kept to herself, filed away in the part of her mind that was always assessing and adapting. As the morning progressed, Kitty participated in discussions about galactic history and cultural exchange, her contributions thoughtful but carefully measured. She spoke about Earth's diverse ecosystems and rich cultural heritage without dwelling on the violent history that had shaped humanity's development. When lunch period arrived, she followed the other students to a massive cafeteria that served food from hundreds of different worlds. The variety was overwhelming, and she found herself standing in front of a distribution terminal, trying to figure out which items might be compatible with human digestion. Zira appeared beside her, offering guidance with surprising kindness. "The blue items are generally safe for carbon-based species with similar biochemistry to yours. I checked the compatibility database after class." "Thank you," Katie said warmly, genuinely touched by the gesture. Perhaps not everyone here saw her as a primitive outsider. They sat together at a long table, and Zira began asking questions about Earth with real interest rather than mockery. Katie described the mountains where she had grown up, the vast forests and clear streams. Though she edited her descriptions carefully to make them sound more peaceful than they actually were, she was in the middle of explaining what snow was when her backpack, which she had placed carelessly on the bench beside her, got knocked to the floor by a passing student. The contents spilled across the polished surface in a scattered mess of datapads, writing implements, and personal items. Katie moved quickly to gather everything, but Zira had already picked up something that made her freeze. A small blade with a carved wooden handle, its edge sharp enough to catch the light in a wicked gleam. "What is this?" Zira asked, her voice uncertain, holding the knife gingerly as if it might bite her. "Oh, that's just a letter opener from home," Katie replied smoothly, taking it back and tucking it into her bag with practiced ease. "It's kind of a family tradition. Everyone in my family carries one." She didn't explain that the letter opener was actually a custom hunting knife her father had made for her 10th birthday, or that she had used it to field dress game and defend herself against predators more times than she could count. Those details seemed likely to cause unnecessary alarm. Professor Velm had noticed the commotion and approached their table with concern etched across his features. "Miss Brooks, I should remind you that Harmony 7 has strict policies regarding weapons. It's not a weapon." "Sir," Katie said with that same disarming smile, "just a tool. Where I come from, everyone carries knives for practical purposes." "I didn't realize it might be concerning here." The professor seemed uncertain how to respond. clearly torn between enforcing regulations and not wanting to cause an interspecies incident on the human student's first day. Finally, he simply nodded and walked away, though Katie noticed him making notes on his datapad as the lunch period wound down. Plex came running over with his own datapad clutched in his hands, his expression a mixture of shock and fascination. "Katie, I've been researching Earth's classification more thoroughly. Do you realize your planet is rated as one of the most dangerous environments known to support complex life? The predator density alone is... Yeah, we have a lot of interesting wildlife," Katie interrupted gently, not wanting the conversation to spiral into territory that might alarm the other students, but Plex wasn't finished, his scientific curiosity overriding social caution. "Interesting? Your world has creatures that can kill adult humans with ease. Bears that weigh over 600 kilograms. Reptiles with venom that causes system failure. Pack hunters with bite forces that we manage," Katie said simply, her smile steady, but something flickering briefly behind her eyes, something cold and ancient that made Plex stopped talking mid-sentence. Rest of the day, Pa. The morning light filtering through Katie's viewport was artificial but carefully calibrated to mimic natural sunrise, though it felt wrong to her in ways she couldn't quite explain. Too steady, too predictable, lacking the subtle variations that came with real weather and atmospheric conditions back home. She dressed quickly in the academy's standard uniform and made her way to the morning meal period, where students gathered in small clusters based on species or shared interests. Zira waved her over to a table where several other students had assembled, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. "I told them about your mountain home," Zira said brightly, gesturing to the others. "They're fascinated by Earth's geography." Katie settled into her seat with a friendly smile while mentally cataloging the new faces. A Varani youth named Quinn, whose athletic build suggested someone who valued physical fitness, and two Eldari twins whose names she struggled to pronounce correctly. They all watched her with the kind of intense interest usually reserved for exotic specimens. "Is it true that Earth has regions where the temperature drops below freezing?" one of the twins asked, their voice carrying genuine disbelief. "Oh yes. Where I grew up, we get snow for about half the year," Katie replied casually, not mentioning that she had spent countless nights in sub-zero temperatures with minimal shelter, learning to build fires and find food when most creatures had gone into hibernation. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their first class period, something called Survival Studies that was supposed to teach students basic emergency protocols. Katie followed the others into a simulation chamber where Professor Velm waited with various holographic scenarios prepared. "Today, we will practice responding to environmental hazards," the professor announced, his forearms manipulating controls that brought up a forest setting filled with strange alien plants. "You will work in pairs to navigate through this ecosystem and reach the safe zone." Katie was paired with Plex, whose analytical mind immediately began assessing the scenario with careful logic. They entered the simulation together, and Katie felt a strange sense of comfort wash over her. Finally, an environment that resembled something close to home. "We should move slowly and observe the plant life for signs of toxicity," Plex suggested, his large eyes scanning the holographic vegetation with scientific precision. "Good idea," Katie agreed, though her own eyes were already tracking movement patterns in the canopy above and noting the spacing between trees that suggested animal trails details that Plex's more academic approach had missed completely. As they progressed through the simulation, Katie found herself automatically falling into old habits. Her feet found the quietest paths without conscious thought. Her breathing regulated itself to minimize sound, and her awareness expanded to encompass everything within a wide radius around them. "How are you doing that?" Plex whispered suddenly, having noticed that Katie moved through the underbrush without making any noise while he kept stepping on twigs and rustling leaves. Despite his best efforts, doing what? Katie asked innocently, genuinely not realizing how different her movement was from his. You're not making any sound. It's like you're gliding rather than walking. Katie shrugged. I guess I just learned to step carefully growing up in the mountains. You don't want to startle wildlife unnecessarily. What she didn't mention was that startling the wrong wildlife on Earth could mean facing down a territorial predator or alerting prey that you were trying to track for food. The skill had been beaten into her through years of trial and error. Often painful error the simulation threw various challenges at them. A sudden rainstorm that reduced visibility. A cliff face that required careful climbing. And finally, a large holographic creature that was supposed to represent a dangerous animal. Most teams scattered in panic when it appeared, but Katie stood perfectly still, her eyes tracking its movements with professional interest. It's just a simulation, she said softly to Plex, who had frozen beside her in fear. But if it were real, you'd want to make yourself look bigger and back away, slowly running triggers. Chase instincts in most predators. How do you know that? Plex managed to ask through his terror. Because that's how you handle bears and mountain lions back home. Katie replied matter-of-factly, watching the holographic creatures circle them before the simulation ended and declared them successful. Professor Val approached them afterward with an expression of mixed concern and fascination. Miss Brooks, your performance was unusual. You seemed completely comfortable in that environment. It reminded me of home, Katie said simply. Her smile, bright and disarming. The biology class that followed proved even more revealing. The instructor, a learned Crithian named Dr. Wen, discussed various ecosystem types and the challenges they presented to different life forms when the topic turned to predator-prey relationships. Katie found herself raising her hand almost unconsciously. Yes, Miss Brooks? Dr. Wen asked, clearly interested in what the human student might contribute. I noticed your examples are all from relatively peaceful worlds. Katie began carefully. But on Earth, we have predators that hunt in packs, coordinate attacks, and remember individual humans across years. They're not just driven by hunger. They're intelligent enough to plan and adapt. The classroom fell silent as Dr. Wen's expression shifted from curiosity to something approaching disbelief. Surely you're exaggerating. Apex predators with advanced cognitive functions would make planetary development nearly impossible. We call them wolves, Katie continued, her voice steady and educational rather than boastful. And they're just one example. We also have bears that can weigh over 600 kilograms and crush bones with their jaws. Big cats that can take down prey twice their size. And reptiles with venom that causes system failure in minutes. She pulled up images on her datapad as she spoke, showing Earth's wildlife in all its terrifying glory. The classroom erupted in shocked whispers as students saw creatures that looked like they belonged in nightmare scenarios rather than actual ecosystems, and humans your species evolved alongside these creatures? Dr. Wen asked, his professional composure cracking slightly. We're not the strongest or fastest, Katie acknowledged with that same friendly smile. But we're persistent. We can track prey for days. We can throw projectiles with accuracy. And we can cooperate in groups to bring down things much larger than ourselves. Drex, the Kron student who had mocked her the day before, spoke up from the back of the room. You're saying humans hunt these creatures? For food? Sometimes, Katie nodded. Though mostly we've learned to coexist, we respect them. They respect us. And we all try to avoid conflict when possible. The lunch period that followed was subdued, with students processing what they had learned about Earth's brutal environment. Katie sat with Zira again, but this time they were joined by Quinn and several others who peppered her with questions about human survival techniques. how do you stay safe from all those predators? Quinn asked, his athletic frame tensing as if expecting something to leap out at him. You learn the signs, Katie explained patiently. Animal behavior is predictable once you understand. You learn what tracks look like, what sounds mean danger, how to read the environment for warnings. She didn't mention that this knowledge had saved her life more times than she could count, or that she had scars hidden beneath her uniform from encounters that hadn't gone as smoothly as Planedrex approached their table hesitantly, his earlier bravado completely gone. I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I didn't understand what kind of world you came from. Katie's smile softened genuinely. No offense taken, you didn't know, and honestly, I'm still learning about your worlds too. Everything here seems so safe and controlled compared to what I'm used to. Safe, Drax repeated quietly, as if the word had taken on new meaning. We thought we were normal, and your world was the exception. But maybe we're the exception, and Earth is. He trailed off. Unable to finish the thought, the afternoon brought physical education, and Katie found herself in a large gymnasium with equipment designed for various species' fitness needs. The instructor, a cheerful Dendari named Coach Vel, explained that they would be doing basic strength and agility assessments. Katie performed adequately on strength tests. Her muscles adapted to Earth's heavier gravity, giving her an edge that surprised the instructor, but it was in the agility course that she truly stood out, moving through obstacles with fluid grace that came from years of navigating treacherous mountain terrain. Have you had formal training? Coach Vel asked after Katie completed the course in record time. Just practical experience, Katie replied. Slightly out of breath but not exhausted like she should have been, the station's lighter gravity made everything feel easier. Though she kept that observation to herself as the day wound down and students returned to their dormitories. Plex caught up with Katie in the corridor, his datapad clutched tightly in his hands. I've been researching Earth more thoroughly, Katie. Do you realize your planet shouldn't be able to support complex civilization? The environmental pressures alone should have prevented advanced development. But we're here, Katie pointed out gently. So clearly it's possible. Yes, but at what cost? Plex's voice carried a mixture of awe and horror. Your species evolved under constant threat, developing traits that would be considered E. The emergency alarm screamed through Harmony 7's corridors 3 days after Katie's arrival, its piercing wail cutting through the peaceful evening like a knife through silk. Students who had been relaxing in common areas or studying in their quarters immediately looked up in confusion. This wasn't a drill. The pattern was wrong, too urgent, and insisting Katie was in the library with Zira and Plex when the alarm sounded. And she noticed immediately how the other students reacted with panic rather than practice calm. They had clearly never experienced a real emergency before, their safe childhoods leaving them unprepared for actual danger. Attention all personnel. A voice crackled through the station's communication system, carrying barely controlled fear. A dangerous specimen has escaped from the xenobiology laboratory. All students are to proceed immediately to designated safe rooms and await further instructions. The library erupted into chaos as students rushed toward the exits, pushing and shoving in their terror. Katie remained seated, her mind already working through the implications, while her body stayed relaxed and ready. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not when there were decisions to be made. Come on. Zira grabbed her arm, trying to pull her toward the safe room. We have to go now. What escaped? Katie asked calmly, her green eyes tracking the security personnel rushing past with weapons drawn. Does it matter? Plex's voice cracked with fear. It's something dangerous enough to trigger a full evacuation. Katie gently extracted her arm from Zira's grip and moved to a nearby terminal, her fingers flying across the controls with practiced ease. Within seconds, she had accessed the incident report, reading the details with growing interest rather than fear. It's a Vraxian stalker, she said quietly, more to herself than her companions. Six-limbed predator, crystalline claws. Adaptive camouflage native to high-gravity worlds with dense jungle coverage. How are you so calm? Zira demanded, her crystalline features reflecting the emergency lights that now bathed everything in red. That thing has already injured 2 security officers. Because panic doesn't help, Katie replied simply, studying the creature's behavioral profile with the focus of someone who had spent years learning to understand predators. And because I've dealt with worse back home. The security feed showed the Vraxian stalker moving through the station's ventilation system, its body contorting in ways that seemed impossible. It was hunting now, driven by fear and instinct in an environment it didn't understand. Katie recognized the pattern because she had seen it before in Earth's wildlife when they were displaced from their territory. We should go to the safe room, Plex urged again. But Katie was already moving in the opposite direction, toward the maintenance corridors that paralleled the ventilation system. Katie, what are you doing? Zira called after her, torn between following protocol and following her friend. Something stupid, probably, Katie admitted with a slight smile. But you two should get to safety. I'm just going to observe. Before they could argue further, she disappeared into a service corridor that most students didn't even know existed. Zira looked at Plex with wide eyes, and without speaking, they both made the same decision. They followed her. Unable to let the human girl face danger alone, Katie moved through the maintenance areas with silent confidence, her feet finding purchase on metal grating without making a sound. She had spent her first few days at the academy mapping these passages, old habits making her learn every exit and alternate route available. Now that knowledge served her well, she could hear the security teams coordinating through the walls. Their tactics all wrong for this type of predator. They were trying to corner it with force, using bright lights and loud noises that would only drive it into a panic. What they needed was someone who understood how predators thought. Your teams are approaching it wrong, Katie said quietly into a communication panel she found, startling the security coordinator, who hadn't expected a student to access tactical channels. Who is this? The coordinator demanded, his voice sharp with stress. All students should be in safe rooms. I'm Katie Brooks, and I know something about predators, she replied calmly, watching the security feed that showed the Vraxian stalker backed into a corner, preparing to attack. That creature is scared and disoriented. The more you pressure it, the more dangerous it becomes. We don't have time for, the coordinator began, but his words were cut off by screams as the cornered stalker lashed out, injuring another security officer before escaping deeper into the ventilation system. Katie didn't wait for permission. She simply continued tracking the creature's movements, reading the patterns in its behavior that others missed. It was moving toward the quieter sections of the station, seeking darkness and isolation, exactly what a stressed predator would do. Zira and Plex caught up to her in a narrow corridor, both breathing hard from the chase. You can't seriously be hunting that thing, Plex gasped. I'm not hunting it, Katie corrected, her voice distant and focused. I'm understanding it. There's a difference. She noticed claw marks on the ventilation panels, fresh scratches that indicated the creature had passed through recently. Without thinking, she ran her fingers over them, feeling the depth and angle, building a mental picture of the Vraxian stalker's size and weight distribution. How do you know how to do this? Zira asked, watching Katie work with something approaching awe. My father taught me, Katie said softly, a brief flicker of emotion crossing her face before the professional focus returned. He tracks dangerous animals in protected territories. You learn to think like them, to understand what drives them. She found what she was looking for, a maintenance section that was dark, quiet, and isolated from the main station areas. The perfect place for a scared predator to hide and try to calm down. And sure enough, When she carefully opened the access panel, she could see the Vraxian stalker huddled in the shadows. The creature was magnificent and terrifying, its crystalline claws catching what little light filtered into the space. 6 limbs folded against its body in a defensive posture, and its eyes, multiple sets arranged around its head, tracked every movement with predatory precision. "Katie, we need to get security," Plex whispered urgently. But Katie held up a hand for silence. She studied the creature for a long moment, noting the rapid breathing that indicated stress, the defensive positioning that suggested fear rather than aggression. This wasn't a monster. It was just an animal displaced from its home and frightened by circumstances it couldn't understand. "Hey there," Katie said softly, her voice calm and non-threatening. "You're pretty far from home, aren't you?" The Vraxian stalker's eyes fixed on her, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. Zira held her breath, certain she was about to watch her friend die. But Katie didn't show fear, didn't make any sudden movements, just stood there with that same gentle smile. "I know you're scared," Katie continued in that same soothing tone. "New place, strange sounds, creatures you don't recognize. It's overwhelming. I get it." She slowly lowered herself into a crouch, making herself smaller and less threatening. The stalker's muscles tensed, preparing to strike. But Katie remained perfectly still except for her voice. "Where I come from, we have creatures sort of like you. We call them big cats. And they're beautiful and dangerous, just like you." She spoke as if having a casual conversation. Her heart rate steady despite the moral danger. When they're scared, they need space, and patience forcing them just makes things worse. Behind her, Plex was frantically trying to signal security, but Katie ignored him. She had entered that focused state where nothing existed except her and the predator, a mental space she had occupied countless times in Earth's wilderness. The Vraxian stalker took a hesitant step forward, its claws clicking against the metal floor. Katie didn't flinch, didn't retreat, just maintained eye contact while keeping her body language submissive and non-threatening. "That's it," she encouraged softly. "Take your time. I'm not going to hurt you. And I won't let anyone else hurt you either." She could see the confusion in the creature's multiple eyes, could sense its predatory instincts warring with the strange calm this small human projected. It had expected fear, expected fleeing prey or aggressive competitors. What it got instead was something it didn't have a category for. Katie reached slowly into her pocket, moving with glacial care to avoid triggering an attack. She pulled out a protein bar from her lunch, unwrapping it with gentle movements. "You must be hungry," she said, breaking off a piece and tossing it gently toward the stalker. "I don't know if you can eat this, but it's worth a try." The creature sniffed the offered food cautiously before consuming it in one quick motion. Katie smiled and tossed another piece, gradually building trust through the universal language of food, and patient security teams arrived then, weapons raised and ready to fire. Katie heard their approach but didn't turn, didn't break the fragile connection she had established. "Stand down," she said firmly, her voice carrying authority that seemed impossible from a 14-year-old girl. "Lower your weapons. You're making it nervous. Miss Brooks, step away from the creature immediately," the security coordinator ordered, but Katie ignored him. "If you fire, it will attack," she stated calmly, still focused on the Vraxian stalker. "And people will die. Is that what you want?" The coordinator hesitated, seeing something in Katie's posture. The assembly hall buzzed with excited conversation as students gathered for Director Salm's announcement, the events of the previous evening having spread through the academy like wildfire. Katie sat near the back with Zira and Plex, trying to make herself small, despite knowing she would be the focus of attention. Director Salm stood at the podium with Professor Velm beside him, and when the ancient Eldari raised his hand for silence, the entire hall fell quiet immediately. Yesterday, We experienced a serious security breach that could have resulted in tragedy, he began, his voice carrying to every corner. Instead, we witnessed something extraordinary. Katie felt hundreds of eyes turning toward her as the director described what had happened. Though he carefully edited his account to make her actions sound more deliberate and less reckless than they actually were, Katie Brooks demonstrated courage, intelligence, and a deep understanding of predator behavior that saved lives, Director Sohn continued. She will be formally commended for her actions, but more importantly, her presence here offers us an opportunity to learn from a species shaped by one of the galaxy's harshest environments. The applause that followed was genuine but uncertain, as if the students weren't quite sure whether to admire or fear the quiet human girl who had faced down a creature that terrified trained adults after the assembly. Katie found herself surrounded by students asking questions. Some wanted to know about Earth's wildlife. Others asked about her training, and a few simply stared at her with newfound respect that made her uncomfortable. "Can you really track animals for days?" asked a silent student whose name Katie hadn't learned yet. "If necessary," Katie replied modestly. "Though usually you don't need to most animals. Follow predictable patterns once you understand their behavior." "What's the most dangerous thing you've encountered?" Someone else called out. Katie thought about the grizzly bear that had chased her up a tree when she was 9. The rattlesnake she had nearly stepped on during a night hike. The pack of wolves that had circled her camp one winter. But those stories seemed likely to cause more alarm than understanding. "Probably a mountain lion," she said finally, choosing the least dramatic encounter. "They're beautiful animals, but very territorial. I had to back away slowly while making myself look bigger." Just like with the Vraxian stalker, Zira pushed through the crowd and grabbed Katie's arm. "Come on. You're going to be late for xenobiology." Dr. Wen's class had taken on new significance after Katie's demonstration, and the instructor seemed eager to explore the practical applications of predator behavior with someone who had actual field experience. "Miss Brooks, would you be willing to share your observations about the Vraxian stalker?" Dr. Wen asked as class began. Katie stood somewhat reluctantly, unused to being the center of academic attention. It was displaying classic fear-based aggression when security cornered it with bright lights and loud noise. They triggered its defensive instincts. "And your approach?" Dr. Wen prompted. I made myself non-threatening, smaller posture. "Calm voice, no direct eye contact initially," Katie explained. "Then I offered food to build trust. Most predators respond to consistent, predictable behavior." A student raised their hand. "But weren't you afraid it would attack you?" Katie considered the question honestly. Of course there was risk. But fear without control leads to panic on Earth. We learned early that panic gets you killed. The class fell silent at that statement. The casual way Katie discussed life and death situations, highlighting just how different her childhood had been during lunch. Katie noticed the social dynamics had shifted. Students who had ignored her before now sought her attention, while others gave her a wide berth, as if she might be dangerous. She found both reactions somewhat amusing and somewhat sad. "You've become famous," Quinn observed, sitting down across from her with his meal. "Everyone's talking about the human girl who tamed a Vraxian stalker." "I didn't tame it," Katie corrected. "I just understood it. There's a difference." Drex approached their table hesitantly, his massive cron frame somehow seeming smaller than before. "Katie, I wanted to ask, could you teach me some of what you know about predators and survival?" Katie's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Of course. Though honestly, the best teacher is experience. You have to actually spend time in dangerous environments to really understand them." "We don't have dangerous environments," Drex admitted quietly. "My homeworld is completely civilized. We eliminated all major threats generations ago." "That must be nice," Katie said. And she meant it, though I suppose it means you never develop certain skills. Over the following days, Katie found herself becoming an informal instructor on survival techniques. She taught Zira how to move quietly through spaces, showed Plex how to read environmental signs, and demonstrated to Quinn the importance of conserving energy during physical exertion. "Why do you step heel to toe like that?" Zira asked during one of their practice sessions in an empty corridor. "Because it distributes your weight more evenly and reduces noise," Katie explained, demonstrating the technique. On Earth, making unnecessary sound can attract predators or scare away food. Everything on your world comes back to predators, Plex observed, taking notes on his datapad. "Because they shaped us," Katie said simply. "Humans evolved in an environment where we were both hunter and hunted. That duality is core to who we are." The morning of the third day after the incident, Katie was helping Zira practice environmental awareness when alarms began blaring again throughout the station. This time, the pattern was different, more urgent. And the announcement that followed made Katie's blood run cold. "All personnel, this is not a drill. We have hostile forces attempting to board the station security teams to defensive positions. Immediately all students to emergency shelters." Katie exchanged a quick glance with Zira before they both started running toward the shelters. But halfway there, Katie slowed to a stop, her mind working through what she had heard. "What are you doing?" Zira demanded. "We need to get to safety." "Hostile forces means people, not animals," Katie said quietly, her expression shifting into something harder, more calculating. "And if they're boarding the station, they're here for a reason." She diverted to a terminal and pulled up the security feeds, watching as armored figures forced their way through the docking ring. Their movements were coordinated and aggressive, designed to intimidate through overwhelming force. Krell Raiders, Katie identified, recognizing the species from her pre-academy briefings. They're pirates who prey on peaceful stations. All the more reason to hide, Plex urged. Having caught up with them, Katie watched the raiders herd station personnel into groups, their weapons drawn and their body language radiating threat. They're taking hostages. That means they want something beyond just stealing supplies. On the screen, the lead raider, a massive Krell with scarred armor, struck a security officer who moved too slowly, his casual violence making Zira gasp in horror. "We should tell Director Soam," Zira suggested, but Katie was already moving, heading toward the administrative section rather than the shelters. They found the director in his command center, surrounded by screens showing the unfolding crisis. He looked up as Katie entered, his ancient face creased with worry. "Miss Brooks, you should be in a shelter," he said, but his tone suggested he had expected her arrival. "I might be able to help," Katie offered, studying the tactical displays with professional interest. "How?" "You're a student, not a soldier." Katie's smile held no humor. "On Earth, we have a saying, the line between civilian and soldier is thinner than most species realize." She pointed to the screens showing the Krell Raiders. "They're using intimidation tactics designed to work on civilized species who aren't accustomed to violence. But their formation has weaknesses." Director Solm studied her for a long moment. "What are you suggesting?" "Let me talk to them," Katie said simply. "As a student delivering supplies to the hostages, they'll see a scared child, not a threat." "Absolutely not," the director responded immediately. "It's far too dangerous. More dangerous than letting them start executing hostages when their demands aren't met." Katie countered, her voice calm but firm. The argument was interrupted by a transmission from the lead raider, his harsh voice filling the command center. "I am Krath of the Krell clans. You have 1 hour to transfer control of this station's systems to us, or we begin killing the hostages." Director Solm's expression tightened with stress. "We cannot give them control. They would kill everyone anyway." Katie watched Krath's image on the screen, noting the way he postured and threatened, the careful orchestration of fear designed to break civilized resistance. He's never encountered humans, she observed quietly. What does that matter? Professor Velm asked from his position at a communications console. Because Krell psychology responds to displays of courage, Katie explained. They respect strength and despise weakness. Sending armed security makes them more aggressive. But sending someone who shows no fear might make them hesitate, Director Solm finished. Beginning to understand, it's still too dangerous, Professor Velm protested. She's a child. A child from a Deathworld, Katie corrected gently. And I've faced down predators that make Krell raiders look tame. The room fell silent as everyone processed her words. The implications of what she was suggesting slowly becoming clear. If I authorize this, Director Solm said slowly. Katie returned to the command center where Director Solm and his team monitored the situation with growing anxiety. The Krell raiders' deadline approaching with no solution in sight. She set down the empty supply container and pulled up a tactical display with practiced ease. They're positioned defensively, but their attention is scattered, she reported calmly. Krath is the key. The others follow his lead without independent thought. What did you learn? Director Solm asked, recognizing that Katie had been gathering intelligence rather than simply delivering supplies. They're confident because they've never faced real resistance from civilized species, Katie explained, her finger tracing patterns on the display. Their tactics rely on psychological dominance, make people afraid enough, and they surrender without fighting. That assessment matches our intelligence, Professor Velm confirmed. But knowing their strategy doesn't give us a way to counter it without risking the hostages. Katie's smile took on a sharper edge. It does if you understand what they don't expect. She outlined her plan quickly and efficiently, her voice carrying a confidence that came from years of tracking and confronting dangerous creatures. The adults in the command center listened with growing disbelief. This is insane, one security officer protested. You're asking us to let a 14-year-old girl confront armed pirates. I'm asking you to trust that a human from a Deathworld knows something about dealing with predators, Katie corrected gently. Krell raiders are just another type of predator, bigger and smarter than most. But they still follow predictable patterns. Director Solm studied her for a long moment, his ancient eyes seeing something in Katie that others missed. If I authorize this, you will have one chance. If it fails, we will have to resort to armed assault. Understood, Katie nodded. Then added with quiet intensity, but it won't fail. 20 minutes later, Katie walked back into the docking bay carrying another container, this time filled with what appeared to be additional medical supplies. Krath watched her approach with an expression mixing amusement and suspicion. The little human returns, he rumbled. You are either very brave or very foolish to come back here. You asked me that before, Katie replied, setting down the container and beginning to distribute items to the frightened hostages. I'm still not sure which one I am, one of the younger hostages. A Korthan child no older than 8 was crying softly. Katie knelt beside him and spoke in a gentle voice. Hey, it's going to be okay. These pirates aren't as scary as they think they are. Krath's eyes narrowed at her casual dismissal. You insult us, child? Perhaps I should show you how scary we can be. He moved toward the crying child with deliberate menace, his massive hand reaching out in an obvious threat. The other hostages gasped in fear, certain they were about to witness violence. Katie stood smoothly, placing herself between Krath and the child, her smile finally fading into something colder. Don't. The single word carried such quiet authority that Krath actually hesitated, confused by the shift in the small human's demeanor. You dare give me orders? He demanded, trying to reassert dominance through volume and aggression. I'm asking you not to hurt a child, Katie replied, her voice calm but edged with something dangerous. On Earth, adults who threaten children face consequences. Consequences? Krath laughed, but the sound was forced. From a little girl who barely reaches my chest? You amuse me, human. Katie's green eyes locked onto his, and what he saw there made him uncomfortable in ways he couldn't articulate. There was no fear, no uncertainty, just a cold calculation that reminded him of the apex predators from his own homeworld. Let me tell you about Earth, Katie said softly, her words carrying to every corner of the now silent docking bay. It's a Category 9 Deathworld where everything is trying to kill you, the animals, the weather, the plants, even the bacteria. She began walking slowly around Krath, and somehow the massive raider found himself turning to keep her in sight. Humans evolved there over millions of years. Learning to survive in an environment that should have killed us. We're not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most naturally armed. Krath's hand tightened on his weapon, sensing a shift in the dynamic but unsure how to respond. What is your point, child? My point is that humans became apex predators anyway, Katie continued, her voice taking on an educational tone, as if she were teaching a class. Do you know how? We learned to think, to plan, to work together, and most importantly, we learned that the most dangerous predators are the ones that don't look dangerous. She stopped circling and faced him directly. You see a small human child and you think harmless, but what you should think is, what kind of world creates children who show no fear? The other Krell raiders were watching now, their weapons lowering slightly as they tried to understand what was happening. Their leader was being challenged by a creature that should have been insignificant, and they couldn't comprehend why Krath hadn't simply eliminated the threat. You're trying to frighten me, Krath accused. But his voice carried less certainty than before. No, Katie smiled again, but this time it held something predatory. I'm trying to help you understand. Humans don't frighten easily because we grew up with fear. We learn to function with it, to think through it, to use it. She reached into her pocket slowly and pulled out her knife, the blade catching the light. This is a tool my father made for me when I was 10. I've used it to field dress game, to defend myself against wild animals, and once to cut myself free from a rock slide that buried me alive. Krath stared at the small blade, recognizing that it wasn't the weapon itself that mattered, but what it represented, a childhood so harsh that carrying such a tool was normal on Earth. Children learn early that there are things worth protecting, even at personal cost, Katie continued, her voice dropping to something quieter and more intense. Family, friends, the innocent, we call it being human. And it's not a weakness. She looked at the crying Korthan child behind her, then back at Krath. So when you threaten a child in front of me, you're not just threatening them. You're triggering something fundamental in what makes me human. And what is that? Krath demanded, trying to regain control of the conversation. Katie's smile widened, showing teeth, the part that survived Earth. The moment stretched out, tension building like a drawn bowstring. Then Katie did something completely unexpected. She laughed, the sound genuinely amused rather than mocking. But here's the thing about humans, she said, her demeanor shifting back to friendly. We also believe in giving people chances. You haven't actually hurt anyone yet. Not permanently. You could walk away from this. Krath's expression showed confusion, giving way to something like respect. You offer me mercy? After threatening me? I didn't threaten you, Katie corrected. I informed you. There's a difference. She gestured to the hostages. These people are scared but unharmed. Your demands haven't been met. So realistically, you failed this raid, but you're all still alive. Still free, take your ships and leave, and everyone goes home. And if we refuse? One of the other raiders challenged. Katie's expression turned thoughtful. Then security will assault this bay with lethal force. Many of you will die. And those who survive will spend the rest of their lives in prison, or... She paused significantly. You'll have to go through me first. The raiders laughed at that, the tension breaking into ridicule, but Krath didn't join them. He was watching Katie with growing understanding, seeing past the cheerful exterior to something far more complex beneath. You would fight us? Alone? He asked, genuinely curious now. If I had to, Katie replied simply. Though I'd really prefer the peaceful option. Fighting is messy, and people get hurt. Kraft made a decision that surprised everyone in the bay, including his own crew. Tell me, human child, if I ordered my raiders to stand down and withdraw, what guarantee do I have that your security forces won't simply arrest us? Katie turned to look directly at a security camera, knowing Director Solm was watching. Director, if the Krell withdraw peacefully, will you grant them safe passage? There was a long pause before Director Solm's voice came through the base speakers. If they release all hostages unharmed and leave immediately, they will not be pursued. Kraft studied Katie for another long moment. Why do you want to save us? We are your enemies, because on Earth, we learned that the best victories are the ones where everyone survives, Katie answered honestly. And because I think you're smart enough to recognize when you're outmatched. Outmatched? By you? Kraft's tone was skeptical, but no longer dismissive. Katie's smile turned mysterious. By humanity, I'm just one girl from one family on one planet. But behind me stand billions more who grew up learning the same lessons. Is that really something you want to test? The psychological warfare was masterful, painting humanity as an unknown threat rather than making empty personal boasts. Kraft could dismiss one child's bravado, but the implication of an entire species shaped by such harsh conditions that gave him pause. You are an unusual creature. Katie Brooks of Earth, Kraft said finally, using her name for the first time. I think perhaps the galaxy has underestimated your kind. Probably, Katie agreed cheerfully. But hopefully you won't make that mistake again. Kraft turned to his raiders. We withdraw or release the hostages and return to the ships. The other Krell protested immediately.